One of the most common sayings about Apple is that they're not usually first to introduce a feature, but when they do, they often implement it better than anyone else. And while there's definitely some truth to that, it raises an interesting question. Where does the innovation end and outright copying begin? Now, to be fair, most of the features Apple's accused of stealing weren't actually originally created by Samsung. But since they're one of the biggest competitors to Apple, and the brand that's popularized these features in the Android world, anytime Apple adds something new that Android phones have had for years, the immediate comparison is directly to Samsung. So today we're going to be taking a closer look at some of the biggest features that Apple's adopted after Samsung, and whether Samsung really deserves the credit for those features. Most importantly, we'll ask, did Apple improve on these features, or just take them at their own gain? So make sure you're subscribed, and let's begin by talking about one of the first features, the hole punch cutout. Samsung introduced this design with the Galaxy S10 back in 2019, and it's safe to say that they were one of the first companies to truly popularize it. The idea of the hole punch cutout was simple, maximizing screen space while minimizing distractions. Instead of sticking with a notch, Samsung opted for a small circular cutout to house the front-facing camera, giving users more usable display real estate. Now, there's a bit of context here that makes this decision a bit more interesting. Samsung had been running ads mocking Apple's notch on the iPhone X for years, so if they had gone for a notch on the Galaxy S10, it would have made them look like massive hypocrites. The hole punch was not only a functional choice, but it also gave them a way to stand apart from Apple's design and reinforce their anti-notch stance. Fast forward a few years, and Apple introduced a similar cutout on the iPhone 14 Pro, but they didn't just copy and paste the concept. Instead of having just a static hole punch, Apple integrated it into the user experience and called it the Dynamic Island. This turned the cutout into an interactive UI element that displayed notifications, music controls, and other live activities. But here's the twist. Other Android manufacturers are now copying Apple's Dynamic Island and combining it with their own hole punch cutouts. So in a weird way, Samsung set the foundation, Apple innovated on it, and now the entire industry seems to be blending these two approaches. Speaking of innovation, let's talk about another tool that could revolutionize how you experience the digital world. With today's sponsor, Mysterium VPN. Mysterium VPN isn't just another VPN that you've seen on countless other videos. This one's decentralized, run by actual people, and because of that, it's completely undetectable. If a website tries to block your VPN, just switch to Mysterium and you're good to go. Sounds impressive? There's more. With 135 plus countries to choose from, Mysterium VPN gives you access to content from practically anywhere in the world. From Australia to, well, not quite the North Pole, but close enough. You get the idea. Unlock shows, websites, and more from just about any corner of the globe with zero hassle. But it's not all just about streaming and entertainment. At its core, Mysterium VPN is here to protect your data. Whether it's your ISP, the government, or anyone trying to snoop on you, Mysterium's state-of-the-art encryption keeps your online activity safe and private. And here's the best part. They've already got some great deals, but you can make them even better. Use my code PUNK when paying with a credit card, and you'll get an extra 20% off with any plan. So go grab the discount and enjoy the internet without any limits. Now then, let's talk about the always-on display. Samsung first introduced this feature back on the S7 in 2016, and at the time, it felt like a real game changer. The idea was simple. Keep essential information like the time, notifications, and calendar events visible without having to wake up your phone. And because Samsung was using AMOLED screens, only the necessary pixels were lit up, which saved a ton on battery life. It wasn't the first implementation of always-on display on a phone, but it was definitely one of the best for Android devices at the time. Apple, as usual, took their time bringing this feature to the iPhone. It wasn't until the iPhone 14 Pro in 2022, 6 years later, that Apple finally introduced their version of the feature. But here's the thing, their initial take was, let's just say, not great. Instead of following Samsung's minimalist approach, Apple decided to dim the entire screen, including the wallpaper. While it looked cool and very Apple-like, it also meant that every pixel on the screen was still turned on, leading to more battery drain than Samsung's version. To Apple's credit, they did eventually address this with some software updates, letting users customize the always-on display. You could turn the wallpaper off and just have the clock and notifications on with a blacked out background. Basically what Samsung had been doing since day one. But even with this improvement, I'd argue that Apple's always-on display is slightly less efficient than Samsung's. It's one of those rare cases where Apple didn't completely perfect the feature when they finally adopted it. Sure, they did add their own flair with customization options, but it feels like they were playing catch up here. Samsung not only brought the feature to the mainstream first, but they also set a high bar for how it should work, which Apple has only recently matched. But next, let's talk about wireless charging, a feature that Samsung introduced on the Galaxy S6 all the way back in 2015. At the time, wireless charging felt like something out of the future. You could just plop your phone down onto a charging pad and watch it charge. There was no fumbling with cables. Samsung's implementation supported the Qi standard, which made it compatible with a wide range of charging pads from day one. Apple, on the other hand, took a couple years to catch up. Wireless charging didn't come to the iPhone until the iPhone 8 and 10 in 2017, and while it worked fine and was also Qi compatible, Apple really didn't do anything groundbreaking with it. If anything, they actually missed an opportunity to take wireless charging to the next level with their abandoned AirPower project. This was supposed to be a multi-device charging pad that could charge your iPhone, Apple Watch, and AirPods simultaneously. No precise alignment required. But after years of delays, Apple ultimately scrapped it, which felt like a huge letdown. Meanwhile, Samsung didn't just stop at wireless charging. In 2019, they introduced reverse wireless charging with the Galaxy S10. This let you use the phone to wirelessly charge your other devices, like earbuds and even another phone. It was a practical and innovative addition that showed just how much potential wireless charging had. Apple still hasn't added reverse wireless charging on their phones, which feels like a missed opportunity, especially when you think about how convenient it would be to charge something like AirPods on the back of your phone. To me, this is an area where I feel like Samsung's still far ahead. Apple's implementation of wireless charging feels more like a bare minimum effort, while Samsung has been consistently pushing the boundaries with features like fast wireless charging and power share. One of my hopes is that Apple eventually adopts wireless charging, but until then, I'd have to give Samsung the edge here. Now let's dive into water resistance, a feature that's pretty much become standard for most smartphones today, but that wasn't always the case. Samsung was one of the first major brands to really push for water resistance with the Galaxy S5 in 2014. It came with an IP67 rating, which meant that it could survive being submerged into water for up to 30 minutes in a depth of 1 meter. And Samsung didn't just add the feature quietly, they made a huge deal about it, with ad campaigns showing the phone being used in pools and under running water. At the time, this felt like a major innovation that set them apart. Apple, on the other hand, didn't introduce water resistance until the iPhone 7 in 2016, 2 years later. It also had an IP67 rating, matching Samsung's earlier efforts. And just like them, Apple marketed it as a key upgrade, focusing on durability and protecting your phone from accidental spills or drops in water. Since then, both brands have continued to improve their water-resistant ratings, with most flagship models now featuring an IP68 certification, offering better protection for deeper and longer submersion. So when it comes to who did it better, it's honestly a tough call. Both brands did a great job making water resistance a priority and improving it over the years. But if we're talking about who set the stage, Samsung definitely deserves the credit for leading the charge and showing the industry that water resistance wasn't just a gimmick. It was something people actually wanted. Moving on, let's take a look at Face Unlock, a feature that Samsung first introduced all the way back with the Galaxy S4. Now, I'll be honest, Samsung's early implementation of Face Unlock was pretty basic. It used the front-facing camera to scan your face, but there was no advanced sensors or anything fancy. This meant that it wasn't very secure and could even be fooled by a photo. Over time though, Samsung stepped up its game. They added iris scanning with the Note 7 in 2016, and they eventually combined iris and face scanning on the Galaxy S8 for enhanced security. It was definitely a big improvement, but it still wasn't foolproof, and it couldn't match the reliability of other biometric options like fingerprint scanners. Then came Apple. With the iPhone X in 2017, Apple introduced Face ID, which took facial recognition to a whole new level. Face ID relies on a true depth camera system that projects thousands of infrared dots to create a detailed 3D map of your face. This made it way more secure than Samsung's earlier attempts and allowed for functionality in low light. Apple went all in on Face ID, even ditching Touch ID completely on most of their newer devices. What's interesting is that while Apple perfected Face Unlock, most Android manufacturers, including Samsung, have seemed to take a different approach. They've stuck with fingerprint sensors, often placing them under the display, likely because it takes up less space and doesn't require a bigger notch or cutout. Samsung does still offer basic Face Unlock, but it's more of a convenience feature than a primary security method. So when it comes to Face Unlock, Apple definitely did it better, to a point where most people associate the feature with them instead of Samsung. But it's worth acknowledging that Samsung was experimenting with this tech years before Apple, even if their execution wasn't quite there yet. But Apple didn't just copy Face Unlock, they perfected it. So when it comes to Apple adopting features that Samsung popularized, the question always arises, is it copying or improving on existing ideas? The truth is, it's a bit of both. Apple often waits until they can fully refine a feature and integrate it into their ecosystem, which sometimes leads to great results like Face ID, and other times leaves them playing catch-up, like with the always-on display. Samsung, on the other hand, has consistently pushed boundaries by introducing features like wireless charging, water resistance, and hole punch cutouts before Apple even considered them. But here's the thing, this back and forth isn't unique to Apple. Samsung and other brands copy Apple too. Samsung's Galaxy Buds, for example, clearly take cues from Apple's AirPods, and rumors of Apple working on foldable devices show how they're keeping an eye on Samsung's lead in the space. It's a cycle of competition where both brands push each other to innovate. So whether you're Team Apple, Team Samsung, or somewhere in between, it's clear that this competition benefits us, the customers. And while we may argue about who did it first or who did it better, I think the real question is, what feature will Apple or Samsung bring next? Let me know what you think in the comments. Did Apple copy too much, or is their approach of waiting and refining features the better way to go?